Hello, and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason Mann, and with me as usual is Rich Craich. Hello, Rich.
Hey, how's it going, Jason?
Doing good. We are right at the end of the season, and one of the bigger non-Russell Westbrook doing crazy scoring things and rebounding and assist things is Lance Stephenson returning back with the Pacers. This has kind of created some major good vibes for the Pacers near the end of the season. And we just thought, okay, this is an interesting phenomenon that occurs occasionally in the NBA where significant players in a team's history return for a second coming. And Stephenson is not necessarily an important player in the scheme of overall NBA history, but in terms of the Pacers, I mean, he's part of some really important teams for them, and they're trying to perhaps recapture that magic, or just taking a flyer on a guy who's since leaving the Pacers has not had a great career. So there's a lot of different types of categories of these things sort of happening. And we're going to kind of get into some of the, different ones and some key players in each one. I think it's an interesting topic to cover.
Absolutely, yeah, and I saw some weird stuff. People were reacting to the Lance Stephenson news of like, oh my god, I don't know why people in Indiana are going so nuts for Lance Stephenson and stuff. And from the outside looking in, it probably is just like, yeah, it's like Lance Stephenson. He's like not that good, but people got to remember. I mean, the beacon of joy for the Indiana Pacers was that run where they were giving the Miami Heat like legit runs in the playoffs almost every single year, and Lance Stephenson was a huge part of them doing that. Obviously Roy Hibbert at the top of his powers, Paul George pre-injury, and some other guys, up and down that
David
bench.
West,
really, David West, yeah, of course. But Lance Stephenson, I mean, don't discredit how big of a deal he was. And I think the problem is because it now seems like so long ago because that franchise is so different, and they've done, there's been so much turmoil. And Lance himself has gone under such, had such issues since leaving Indiana that I think we forget what an important piece he was and what an important piece Indiana was really to that Miami team being what they were too, because they always had a threat in the East, and it was Indiana. And I don't know if there was ever a time when people really thought the Pacers would knock them off, but they brought them to game sevens. Like, there were some really good games between those two, so we kind of forget it, and I think it's now because it's such ancient history and that we've moved on or whatever. But yeah, Lance Stephenson is a huge part of this generation of Indiana Pacers fans. And there's a lot of guys that we're going to talk about here who maybe from the outside looking in, it's like, well, it's not that big of a deal that they've come back to, their team that they were at before. But in the case of Lance and these few other ones we're going to mention as well, we have some stars or whatever, but there's going to be some et cetera guys as well. And Lance is a big deal in Indiana. And I think it's a pretty fun thing that he's been doing so far. And early returns, I mean, obviously we're at, as of this recording, it's like 4 or 5 games or whatever. He hasn't done a ton, but early returns are he's doing better than he has, in previous stops, at least this season. So maybe it is a thing where he just feels comfortable there, and maybe then he does kind of resurrect his career to whatever Lance Stephenson can resurrect his career to. Maybe he does that in Indiana, which would be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And we'll definitely note here that we brainstormed and came up with as many of these guys as possible. But
we're talking about everyone. We're going to talk about each and every one. So strap in 3.5 hours of. No? I'm
sure there will be some of consequence that we did not get into. So for anyone who, if we missed your favorite, we apologize for failing you in this matter. But I think we're going to cover this topic pretty exhaustively, so I think we'll be okay. But just wanted to throw that out there for the disclaimer for the nitpickers in our audience, and I'm sure there's a handful of nitpickers out there. So. And we'll talk about Lance, I guess, specifically first, since he is the generated the topic here. And he left the Pacers the first time. He went to the Hornets in free agency for 3 years, $27 million, which is actually less than the Pacers' 5-year, $44 million offer, which is a little confusing to a lot of people. I guess he wanted the short-term deal to be able to get back into free agency sooner, but did not work out very well in Charlotte. He shot 17% from three the next season, which is one of the worst seasons in regards to shooting in NBA history, and just did not seem to get along there, and was traded almost immediately the next year to the Clippers, and then sort of bounced around, played for the Grizzlies for a bit, kind of helped them with their one of their weird end of season runs when they were dealing with so many injuries, and kind of had this patchwork group of guys. Maybe a few of those guys might be considered ruffians and
scoundrels, if you will.
Yeah, scoundrels, perhaps. Yes. I think Matt Barnes was heavily involved. Then also this year played for the Pelicans and the Timberwolves briefly before coming back to the Pacers. And
I don't believe the Wolves thing. I don't believe that. I don't remember that happening. I don't think it happened.
I think it was like 4 games, literally.
I don't trust that it actually happened.
Yes. Ian wrote a piece about it on He Wrote Diary. But
has anybody actually seen it? Like, I'm glad he wrote. I mean, people wrote about it, and it's like, yes. But I'm a conspiracy theorist on the Lance Stephenson Wolves tenure. I feel like, you can say it all you want, but I don't think it actually happened. So.
I mean, we have evidence people went on the moon, but some people don't believe that. So
right, exactly.
So, there you go. Oh, fair enough, Rich. I never took you to be a conspiracy theorist,
always,
but I guess in this matter, I suppose so. So, I mean, I think his comeback has been more about the contribution is sort of, restoring a attitude or just kind of bringing good vibes to the Pacers, making the fans feel good, remembering the teams of the past, and obviously helping them along with their playoff run and going back to the only place he's really fit. I mean, this is they've won 3 of the 4 games, and as of this recording, are a game ahead in the 7th seed with 2 games left in the season. Looks like they're going to make the playoffs unless something really weird happens. His first game back, first home game, he had 12 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists in 25 minutes. But the larger impact was described by Mark Monteith in talking about this game. Whether he was shouting encouragement from the bench, wagging his tongue to celebrate the good moments, keeping up a running dialogue with the Raptors, stopping to stare at front row fans after dropping a 3-pointer, or even dribbling in for an ill-advised layup in the final seconds, Stephenson made things happen for the Pacers. So he did a little bit of everything. The whole Lance Stephenson experience was out there for the home fans in his first home game back. So, whether it'll actually last. I mean, it's another odd thing for a guy who's was on 10-day contracts to be signed to a 3-year deal. That's sort of an odd situation. Of course, obviously the history between them going in. I'm not sure what the guaranteed years are. There might not be totally guaranteed money for all of that, but still interesting to see. Hopefully it'll work out. But as we're going to get to, some of these situations work out very well, and a lot of them only the good vibes do not last very long.
Yeah, we'll see about Lance. I'll hedge my bets on that one. I don't know. But, hey, this is his home in a lot of ways. So I'm confident maybe, but it is still Lance Stephenson. So he's always a little interesting there. But, I'm hopeful for him because I always I think an NBA with a fun guy like Lance Stephenson in there is an NBA that I like. So.
Yes. Fun on the court anyway.
I don't know about it.
Had a few off the court, some unfortunate things happen that may make it less fun. But on the court, fun guy. So, I guess we'll get into the first category, which is really the rarest category of guys who are, acknowledged superstars, Hall of Fame level players, returning basically, when they're in their prime or still, producing at an extremely high level. The prodigal sons, if you will, they're sent away for or leave, for a certain reason, but come back and, either it's obvious that this guy is going to be, the savior of the franchise, or maybe it's not obvious and they turn out to be much better than anybody expected. So I think we have an instance of each we're going to get into in pretty good detail.
Yeah, the first one we're going to get into LeBron James, Cleveland Cavaliers. As you may have heard, Jason, I don't know if you're aware, but LeBron James, he announced that he would sign with the Miami Heat on a live ESPN special called The Decision many, many years ago. I don't know if you were aware of that or if you read anything about that, but it did indeed happen.
I've heard a couple things,
Yeah, a few things have been written here and there, but luckily it hasn't. People didn't go too nuts about it. They're like, he's a free agent. He can go wherever he wants. He's more than allowed to. That's his contractual, the union, collectively bargained right to go wherever he wants to. It's fine. So
if you want to have a TV special to announce it, I mean, hey, efficient.
Yeah, right. Just don't donate the money to charity, or else everybody gets really
gives
mad.
Jim Gray some work, which we like.
Of course, anything that can line Jim Gray's pockets are a-okay by us. But
definitely,
so this is, of course, the famous "I'm taking my talents to South Beach." Of course, the background of LeBron James, of course, drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers from Ohio, was the prodigal son by every. I mean that's what he was. I mean that term almost fits him to a T. Some good years, some bad years with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They got to an NBA final very early in his tenure. Then they kind of struggled to get out of the East and had some issues here and there. And this was a big decision that everybody was. I mean, it was titled The Decision, and it was a big deal of what the hell is LeBron going to do. We don't have to tell you that, but some interesting stuff too. There is a book that as we're recording this, I think it's coming out either today or or tomorrow. Brian Windhorst is doing a book about the next decision that we're going to talk about a little bit, but I know there's some issues or some discussion about this original decision in it as well. It's about LeBron and sort of his movement around the Cavs, but during this free agency period, he was contacted, goddamn, by several teams, including the Bulls, the Clippers, the Heat, the Knicks, the Nets, and of course the Cleveland Cavaliers, who wanted him to not leave. And he teamed up with Chris Bosh, who signed as a free agent with Miami, leaving Toronto, and Dwayne Wade, who re-upped with Miami to create a new big three. So that was LeBron, of course, leaving the Cavaliers and going to the Miami Heat, but we're not interested in that. We're interested in him coming back, which... after 4 seasons and 2 championships in Miami, LeBron comes back to Cleveland. He revealed via in a much better way, PR-wise, in a first-person essay in Sports Illustrated that he intended to return to the Cavaliers and to bring a title to his hometown. A month after his signing, the Cavaliers acquired Kevin Love from the Minnesota Timberwolves and then formed a new star trio with Kyrie Irving. So it's Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, and LeBron James. Expectation-wise, I mean, it's LeBron James coming off of, 4 seasons, 2 titles, 4 straight NBA Finals with Miami Heat. It was a big deal. He was going to come to Cleveland and he was going to win them a title. They were going to be a contender. They were going to be in the mix every single year that he's there. And so far, so good as far as his things. But before we get to that, we'll go back to his first game, though. October 30th, 2014, it was versus the New York Knicks. It was his first game back with the Cleveland Cavaliers. 17 points, 4 assists, 5 rebounds, 8 turnovers. Not a great game by LeBron James standards. It's actually his 8th worst game score of the year. And if people don't remember, and I know, Jason, you'll probably remember about this, because I think we were doing the podcast at this point, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm positive we talked about this a little bit too, but the people that don't remember, LeBron got to Cleveland, then had like this weird period where he like wasn't that good for like a few months, and nobody was really quite sure, and then he kind of chilled off for a little bit, took some time, and came back. But that original game that I'm talking about, the October 30th, was actually his 8th worst game score of the entire season. So it was one of his worst games the entire year. He was quoted afterwards, "It was a special night. I'm glad it was great, but I'm also glad that it's over." So LeBron, of course, was ready to kind of get out of there and get things going for Cleveland, and things have so far turned out pretty well. He's 2 NBA Finals trips and 1 championship, so not bad at all. And this year, of course, all signs point to Cleveland at least return to the NBA Finals or definitely getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. I would pretty well bet that they're going to make the NBA Finals. As far as they win a championship or not, who knows? But you get to 3 NBA Finals in 3 years with LeBron and Cleveland. I think that's about all you can ask for, especially if you got that 1 championship, which he really wanted to get in Cleveland. So that was LeBron leaving and then returning as the prodigal son.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously they've had struggles for the last 6 weeks or so and have not looked good, but I'm pretty confident they will turn it around at least well enough to make the finals. Whether they can actually win is another question, but of course they didn't seem like it last year, and they pulled that off, so you never know. Yeah, I mean, LeBron, I think early in Cleveland, I mean, I think the struggles were compared to the LeBron struggles, the relative speaking, rather than, LeBron, rather than struggles for, of course, an ordinary player. But definitely, yeah, there was some weirdness for the first few months in Cleveland. I mean, honestly, I mean, there were certainly expectations that, hey, LeBron team's going to make the finals, but it's pretty remarkable that they actually managed to do that, considering what they had to do to put that team, all those new pieces together, Love and Irving being really inexperienced for the in the playoffs, neither having actually made the playoffs before, and then the patchwork they had to do after Love got hurt and then Irving later getting hurt in the finals, to be able to accomplish what they did is pretty remarkable. Even though obviously they had some great talent, and it was more a team built for a couple of years down the road making the finals, as opposed to that year just having LeBron, who's, like I said, almost automatically going to take you to the finals. Obviously, but it was a little bit of a it took longer to gel. It wasn't like they were ready made.
Right, and it was that way in Miami too, and people kind of forget that too. It took a year almost until Miami got it. But it's funny when like you struggle and still like, darn, we're in the NBA Finals, but we're just not there yet. We're just not quite there yet. And that's people also forget too that Cleveland team that made it to the NBA Finals against the Warriors was LeBron and like Matt Dellavedova was like the second best, because everybody was hurt and like the team was just falling apart or whatever, and it was just LeBron on his own leading that team. Obviously the Warriors won and won pretty easily, but I mean, what LeBron was able to do with the team that he had left after Kyrie and Love had been hurt was pretty remarkable as well. And that seems like such ancient history though, because they come back next year, the next year and beat the Warriors after being down 3-1. So that's always and that's sort of clouded that first year. But yeah, the first year was there was a lot of weirdness there, but I don't think Cleveland Cavaliers fans would trade anything to have the 3 straight or what I'm assuming will be 3 straight NBA Finals with LeBron back there, and I don't think he's ever leaving again. I think he's pretty well a Cleveland Cavalier for life now. So
I would imagine so. Yes. So next, we have Steve Nash, who some may not realize had a first go round with the Suns in '97 and '98. He was drafted in the '96 draft famously. Didn't play a whole lot in those first 2 seasons because he was behind Kevin Johnson and Jason Kidd. Kidd was required early on in Nash's rookie season, and this kid, absolutely. Really at the beginning of his prime and was, a great player there. Kevin Johnson was still really effective even though he was aging and would retire, I believe, in '99. He didn't do a whole lot there. I mean, he showed some, talent in his second year. He started, shooting was better. He averaged 9.1 points per game, 3.4 assists per game in 22 minutes in 1998, averaging 22 minutes. So the trade in the 98 offseason was traded Dallas for Martin Mercep, Bubba Wells, the draft rights to Pat Garrity, and a first-round pick that became Sean Marion. So that
who is Martin Mercep? I've never heard of Martin Mercep. Do you know anything about Martin Mercep?
I do not know about anything about Martin Mercep
or Bubba Wells. Yeah, Bubba Wells is not. That's a NASCAR racer. That's not an NBA player. So.
And of course, Dallas will sign anybody. They'll sign quarterbacks. So maybe he is a NASCAR racer. You never know.
As we're recording this, Tony Romo is suiting up. So he's an Estonian Martin Mercep. So it's a double umlaut there on the U. So we're probably mispronouncing his name horribly, but whatever.
Well,
who cares?
Our apologies. I'm sure our Estonian listeners will care very much, but. So Nash was an all-star.
We're big there. Don't
I'm sure we are. I'm sure we're huge. I mean, we're big everywhere. So Estonia would be no exception. And obviously Nash was, he was really good for Dallas. Led them to their real, first success in more than a decade. With Dirk Nowitzki and Michael Finley, kind of the big 3 that they had. And they had a really good run, and we've talked about them in the early 2000s. Made a Western Conference Finals. Really was an effective team. And it looked like they could still be maybe by 2004 they kind of reached what they had. Nash at that point was 30, and Mark Cuban, the Dallas owner, not really interested in bringing him back for a huge, long-term contract. He was signed for 6 years, $65 million. There was a big free agent ruling with new Suns owner Robert Sarver, the Colangelos, Amari Stoudemire, Rex Chapman, I guess, was there as well. And but there was understandably fear from Dallas' side that investing this much into a 30-year-old with a wonky back, not a great idea. But obviously it worked out tremendously well for the Suns. They much more than they would ever have expected. Obviously 2 MVPs, 3 Western Conference Finals appearances in 6 seasons. And along with Mike D'Antoni, Marion, Stoudemire, those guys, Joe Johnson initially. Led this 7 seconds or less era that transformed the NBA. It became this this transcendent team, even though unfortunately they did not make an NBA Finals. But as far as the first game goes, they Nash didn't have to play a whole lot because they were playing the 2004-2005 Hawks, the patron saints of our podcast, and they beat them pretty easily by 30 points. So he only played 24 minutes, had 12 points, 4 assists, and 2 steals. The team started off that season 13-2 and had a tremendous year. But from Dallas' perspective, the trade wasn't, losing Nash, they allowed them to carve an identity around Dirk. They were, a 60 almost plus win team the next 3 seasons, went to the finals in 06, had some playoff disappointments from 07 to 2010, but then 2011 they ended up winning a championship. So, things turned out pretty well on the Dallas side, even though obviously talent-wise it was a mistake to, give up Nash for basically nothing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I remember even at the time it was interesting from the standpoint of Dallas hadn't really missed a beat without Nash, but then there was also it was this weird thing where Dallas was still doing well, but at the same time Phoenix was doing well, and it was just like this weird juxtaposition of these two franchises that were doing well, and it's like, man, if you had put Nash on this Dallas team, like how well would they have done? But I think it worked out for the best for everybody involved, because I mean the Suns obviously were able to get Nash, who fit in perfectly with D'Antoni, and Dallas, I thought, as much as it hurt to lose Nash, they were able to then integrate Jason Terry a little bit more, get a little bit better defensively, and sort of change their identity as well throughout that time. And I think in a lot of ways it led them to, of course, the NBA Finals a few years after that, and then what eventually was the building blocks of their championship team years later with Jason Kidd and a lot of those things, and maybe it was getting rid of Nash that sort of changed their identity a little bit and held them kind of morph into something different than they were with Nash. But still, it was so hard to see Nash doing as well as he was, and then seeing Dallas without Steve Nash, and it's like, geez, you had him, like just keep him. But I think it worked out best for both teams, and it's rare that a thing works that way, where a guy leaves and the other franchise doesn't lose a ton, even though that guy goes and immediately makes a team really great as well. So it was I enjoyed it, and it made it fun, and it made kind of a fun rivalry between the two teams as well, which was always fun.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple other instances of note for this.
Can I just briefly interrupt about Bubba Wells? Yeah. I can't believe we didn't. I think I knew this, but I didn't know it was Bubba Wells. This is per Wikipedia. Bubba Wells holds the dubious distinction of being the player with the quickest disqualification due to personal fouls in an NBA regular season game. In December 1997 against the Bulls, then Mavericks coach Don Nelson employed a desperate tactic to limit the Bulls' offense. He inserted Wells into the game with the express purpose of fouling power forward Dennis Rodman, a notoriously poor free throw shooter, away from the ball. The plan failed because Rodman hit 9 of 12 free throws, and Chicago went on to win the game 111-105. Wells fouled out late in the third quarter after registering his sixth personal foul in a total of 3 minutes played. So Bubba Wells. there you go.
That's bonus Bubba Wells fact. So that's good. Thank you, Rich, for checking that out.
Yeah, no problem. And then there's something. The previous summer, Wells served as a supporter to Jones, his wife, on the NBC game show Deal or No Deal. So we'll have to record that episode to see Bubba Wells in the crowd cheering on his wife on Deal or No Deal. So there we go.
All right, so, let's keep that on. Yeah. Some other instances of this, only really a couple that fit. First would be Rick Barry for the words. Of course, we talked about Rick Barry plenty on this program. He left the ABA, or left the NBA for the ABA for the Oakland Oaks in the 1968 season. He tried to come back to the Warriors a couple seasons later, but a lawsuit blocked that. Eventually returned to the Warriors in 72 and 73 after 5 seasons away. They would win a championship in 75, so that worked out pretty well for them. Other one is Wilt Chamberlain, who came back to the city of Philadelphia with the 76ers in 1965. The Warriors had left Philadelphia before the 63 season, and then Syracuse moved to Philly the next year, and then eventually Wilt made his way from the Warriors to the 76ers. So it's not exactly a situation because it's a different franchise, but it's the same fan base. I think it's certainly close enough, and things worked out well. The Sixers won the 76 NBA championship against the Warriors, of all people, against Rick Barry. So nice little circle there. But yeah, those would be kind of the two other instances that stand out. There are not really that many instances of NBA teams, leaving a city and then coming to the same city, only a couple of years later, and no particularly transcendent players that played for, both franchises that played in that city. So I think Wilt is unique in that respect.
Yeah, no, it definitely, there's not a whole lot of examples, and yeah, like we brought up, those are probably the only real important examples, real big examples that stand out immediately. There are some ones of guys that we're going to talk about here in a bit who, were stars at one point, but then they come back, and it's just not quite the same.
Right, yeah, they're not superstars anymore. They may have been at one point, or all these guys were at one point, but and some of them do contribute a lot, and then a few do not do a whole lot, where it's very much the end for them. And some guys, it's like, it does work out pretty well. So the interesting contrast in the guys that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so this section is coming home while past their prime, as you mentioned. Superstars returning from past their prime and coming, quote, home. And the first example, Scottie Pippen, of course, played for the Chicago Bulls from 1988 to 1998, and returned in 2004. So the background of that, Scottie Pippen, after years of rumors and public cries of not getting paid what he was worth, and rumors that he was going to get traded for Sean Kemp, and every offseason, really. I mean, we've talked about that when we did a specific episode about Scottie Pippen many moons ago, about just every single offseason was like, all right, Pippen's going to get traded this offseason. Okay, he's going to get, and he was very vocal too about, I'm not getting paid what I'm worth. He signed his contract before the TV contracts and a lot of the money exploded in the NBA, and he was kind of locked in there and was never, given a new deal by the Bulls. So he always was kind of notoriously underpaid, contrary to, his performance or whatever. So it was always kind of a rough situation for him there. But finally, before the lockout shortened season in 98-99, he was traded. Of course, the Bulls at this point had just wrapped up their second three-peat with Jackson, Jordan, and Rodman, along with Pippen. Those guys had all departed, and Pippen was the last one to go. Pippen, at the point he was traded, was the Bulls' second all-time leader in points, assists, and steals. And he was traded to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Roy Rogers and a second-round pick. I believe they drafted Jake Voskels for that, so good little value there for Roy Rogers and Jake Voskel. But it did not work out that well. But hey, on the Houston side, it didn't really work out either. So hey, everybody. But Pippen's trade, of course, received a ton of publicity. He got a cover of Sports Illustrated, and his salary, thanks to his sign and trade deal the Bulls did, was $11 million. It was almost 4 times as much as his salary the previous season with the Bulls. So he definitely got paid, and it seemed like everything was going well. He was going to go to Houston, team up with Hakeem Olajuwon and Charles Barkley, and it didn't work out that well because, of course, they were a big disappointment, that team, and Pippen then, after that offseason, requested a trade from Houston. I did have to leave these quotes in here because these are just too fantastic to let go, even though that's not really what we're talking about, but I can't. These quotes are just too awesome. So this is after Pippen had requested a trade, and then he had been granted that trade, and they'd sent him over to Portland. Charles Barkley, he was quoted as saying, "For him to want to leave after 1 year, it disappointed me greatly. The Rockets went out of their way to get Scottie, and the fans have treated him well, so I was just disappointed in him." Scottie Pippen, his response was, "I wouldn't give Charles Barkley an apology at gunpoint. He can never expect an apology from me. If anything, he owes me an apology for coming to play with his fat-ass butt." So, his fat butt. I apologize. He did not say ass. I apologize, Scottie. No. He said butt, not ass.
Yes.
So there you go. So, a lot of candor there from old Scottie, but yes. There you go. But we're not talking about his Portland tenure. We're going to talk about when he came back to the Bulls, and this was in the July of 2003, Bulls general manager John Paxson pursued Pippen to return to his old team, which had little success following the breakup of the Bulls dynasty in 1998. The deal was made official July 20th, 2003, as Pippen signed a 2-year, $10 million contract with the franchise. Pippen was quoted as saying, "At the end of the day, I have trust and respect for Pax," John Paxson, of course, who was the general manager. Coming back to Chicago was a huge factor, but John Paxson tipped the scales. So I did not know this, though. Pippen, he had a lot of suitors this offseason. Pippen entertained interest from 7 NBA teams and offers from multiple teams, including, he did not, but rumors were the San Antonio Spurs and the contending Dallas Mavericks both sent things in, but he right away, once the Bulls reached out and once Paxson reached out, he signed with them and did not listen to offers from either of those, even though there was interest coming from those teams. But we'll see how that worked out. I'm going to guess probably not well, and if you know history, it didn't go too well. But expectation-wise, here's Pippen's quote when he signed. "I think I know how to win games in the NBA. It might sound simple, but both winning and losing can become a mindset, and I won't accept losing ever. Whether it's on the floor, in the huddle, at practice, or just demonstrating a winning leadership, I plan on helping this team win." In his first game back, October 29, 2003, versus the Washington Wizards, Michael Jordan had departed already the prior year, so don't worry, they did not play each other. Pippen played 31 minutes. He scored 7 points and grabbed 7 rebounds. So hey, not bad, from a older Scottie Pippen, a guy who had some injury history the past few years, and then the injury history reared its ugly head because things did not turn out well. The Bulls won 7 less games than they had the year prior. Pippen only played in 23 games. And then in February 2nd, 2004, he played the last game of his NBA career against the Seattle Supersonics. He scored 2 points, had 3 assists, and 1 rebound in only 8 minutes of play. So it did not work out well for Pippen. And that was it for him after that 1 year with the Bulls. And he, of course, would then retire. He got a front office job with the Bulls as kind of a cushy, he sits on the sideline and drinks like they pay him for it. But, so not a bad gig, but he's still with, I believe he's still with the organization in some capacity. But this was his return, but didn't work out very well on the floor. But we did want to mention, too, a kind of a bonus here. Charles Oakley, his former teammate of Scottie Pippen, he returned to the Bulls in 2001. He started 36 of 57 games. He averaged 3.8 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists. Not too bad, but the next year he would reunite with former Bulls teammate and friend Michael Jordan in Washington. So he'd play 1 year in Chicago, then go to Washington, then I think he bounced around. I think he was in Houston 1 year before he finally retired. But he did come back as well to a lot less fanfare than Scottie Pippen did, but still a comeback from another guy from that emerging Bulls team in the late 80s. So
yes. So speaking of not working out well, George McGinnis, the new Hall of Famer, shouldn't tease George. Obviously, congratulations to him for making the Basketball Hall of Fame. And he had been, a dominant star for the Pacers in the ABA. He shared the 1975 MVP with Julius Erving. Led them to 2 championships and 3 finals appearances while he played there. And As finances for the Pacers became precarious, he eventually was wooed by the NBA, ended up with the 76ers for the 76 season, and then eventually would be joined by Irving once the leagues merged, and they had a few years together. Then he was traded to the Nuggets of 479, where he'd have his last All-Star season. And, the way that he was felt there, he also was a star at Indiana University for a season and, had his roots there. Even immediately after he left, he was given a huge ovation in Indianapolis by fans during a return during an exhibition game. So, there were not the hard feelings when he left like there are in certain circumstances. I think everyone understood, the situation, why he left, and, and people were mostly fine with it, which is a refreshing attitude, quite frankly. So he ended up coming back in 1980, was traded for Alex English and a first-round pick. Alex English would go on to 8 All-Star games and become a Hall of Famer. It would not. This is definitely sort of the end of McGinnis's career. We'll get into details in a minute, but it was definitely quite an uneven trade. And he was brought back. Slick Leonard said in his book that he thought he could get another couple of good years out of McGinnis, that he thought, he was only 29 at the time. It didn't seem like he definitely struggled a bit that season, but it wasn't like he'd just been an All-Star the year before, so it wasn't like, absolutely it was going to be disaster. It was more like just thinking, okay, he's 29, maybe just needs to change scenery, things are going to be okay. And there's even a Washington Post piece written about it where it was written from the the Bullets' perspective, since obviously the Bullets were the hometown paper, but basically like, oh, look out for Indiana now. Even though he's struggled a little bit this year, he's averaged all of these incredibly great seasons before, and he thinks that he could really do well. And in his first game back, according to Mark Monteith, he received a 1-minute standing ovation, was introduced before the game, and his return, in fact, sold out Marcus Square Arena, and they lost to Philadelphia by 1. He had 14 points and 13 rebounds playing off the bench. So the first game back was a success despite the loss. Unfortunately, things did not work out as well as we alluded to. They finished 9-16 after McGinnis joined. They were in a playoff race, and they ended up missing the AD playoffs. They didn't make the playoffs the next season. They lost to the Sixers in a 2-0 series. And then the following year, McGinnis definitely was, he was a below average player, but he wasn't terrible for those 2 seasons. And then 82, his play got really, really bad. He was averaging just 4.7 points off the bench. And he was released in training camp in 82. He was offered a press conference and a farewell ceremony, but he refused to retire. He asked to be put on waivers instead, so he'd be available to other teams. Unfortunately, nobody called.
Oh,
so
that's so sad.
Yeah, that is sad. But he did, after being overlooked for so many years, he has finally made the Hall of Fame. So congratulations to him again.
Congrats to him. They're well deserved too. There's still a few snubs out there, but we're good. We're glad we're knocking off some of the list too. So
absolutely.
Yeah, he's definitely deserving, so I'm glad to see him getting in there as well. Good Hall of Fame class in general. I really like this class. It's not what this podcast is about, but good class, and I think they got a few guys that have been waiting for a while in there, and hopefully there's a few more now in the next few seasons that can finally get in there. But good.
Yeah, we like it when good players make the Hall of Fame.
Exactly. Yes.
We are pro that. Yes.
Right. All right, so now we got to Allen Iverson, 1997 to 2006, obviously a Philadelphia 76er, and then he came back in 2010. You might not remember, and if you don't remember, that's probably for the better because it was no good. So how he left after years of disappointment and disagreements between Iverson and the franchise that loved him so dear. He was traded December 2006 to the Denver Nuggets. Earlier in the year, rumors had swirled around the team that Iverson had demanded a trade. Went so far as Sixers GM Ed Snyder confirmed the trade rumors in a game against the Washington Wizards on ESPN, said, "We're going to trade him. At a certain point, you have to come to grips with the fact that it's not working. He wants out, and we're ready to accommodate him." And I remember that going on. It was like the most awkward thing ever. It was like, okay, that's not the best way to have leverage, but okay, if that's fine. They were able, though, to trade him. The Philadelphia 76ers sent Iverson and forward even McFarlane. I don't know anything about Ivan McFarlane, whatever. We'll never speak of him again. To the Denver Nuggets for Andre Miller, Joe Smith, and 2 first-round picks in the 2007 NBA draft. At the time of the trade, Iverson was the NBA's number 2 leading scorer, with new teammate Carmelo Anthony being number 1. How could this go wrong? Well, it didn't go horribly wrong. They were okay, but it ended up not working all that well. But then Iverson would come back to the Philadelphia 76ers in November of 2009 after some uneven tenures with Denver. Then he moved on to Detroit, and then he also moved on to the Memphis Grizzlies as well. I can confirm that one happened. I know that there is some issue if that Memphis Grizzlies Allen Iverson one, and I've seen video. It has happened. So.
Okay,
in case you were wondering if that Memphis, because it is, the Memphis Grizzlies 10 years and stuff, and Minnesota Timberwolves, it can get a little bit. No, he did play for the Memphis Grizzlies. I can confirm that. But of course, November 2009, Iverson returned to the Sixers. Team made the decision to pursue Iverson after their starting guard Lou Williams suffered a broken jaw and was expected to miss at least 30 games. The expectations at this point were, Iverson, his star had faded quite a bit, and he no longer had the scoring ability he did during his prime. There was a few factors. He was, of course, getting there in age, personal shape. He didn't really keep himself in tip-top shape, injuries, and then just the general wear and tear of being a little guy doing what he did on the court and playing such a rough style for his size. Eventually it was going to kind of creep up on him, and at this point it really had. But there were still some pretty decent expectations that he would fit into a pretty talented roster. He made his return on December 7th, 2009 versus the Denver Nuggets, ironically enough. He garnered a thunderous ovation from the sold-out crowd. He finished the game with 11 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, a steal, and no turnovers. He was quoted as saying, "I had chill bumps running all through my body the whole game. I just felt like I was back home. It was deja vu, just a really good feeling. The fans made it hard on me because they made me more nervous than I already was." So cool little quotes there. Didn't really work out all that well overall. The Sixers, who were bad prior to Iverson coming, which is actually interesting because this roster is very talented, and it didn't really work, and the pieces didn't really come together. But here's who they had on the roster. They had Andre Iguodala, the aforementioned Lou Williams, of course Allen Iverson came later, Thaddeus Young, Elton Brand, Willie Green, Maurice Spates, Samuel Dalembert, and Drew Holiday, and of course Jason Kapono. I should not leave out Jason Kapono, but that's a good little roster. But it makes no sense when you combine all these pieces. But every one of those pieces was able to do well on another team, but just never really worked out altogether with those. But
well, that was kind of the basic, Doug Collins team that made the conference finals or second round or whatever. I mean, they had they were like a 45-50 win team. They were all right, but a couple of those guys were still pretty young at that point.
Yeah, and the Derrick Rose injury hurt, certainly helped them get to the next round.
Well, they lucked into that a little bit. But they still
they were a decent team. They eventually got together.
They weren't garbage. That's my point.
No. This year they were bad, but it was kind of coalescing a little bit. But it got a little bit better. The prior years. But as far as with Iverson, it didn't really work out well. February 22nd, 2010, Iverson left the 76ers indefinitely. He cited the need to attend to his 4-year-old daughter who was having health issues. So that tenure did not work all that well, and numbers weren't great, and that was the end of Allen Iverson's NBA career as well. So not a good way for him to go out, really, and not a good way, especially going back to his hometown and really seeing that star fade. But he's not alone. There are quite a few other guys that have met a similar fate.
Yes, and unfortunately, and I remember, and we both read it, the Kent Babb book, Not a Game, Iverson, which we talked about on the podcast. I mean, there was a thought that Iverson still saw himself as the old Iverson, still saw himself as a star, and thought okay, this is going to be my show again. I'm going to be in charge. Where they, the team saw it more as okay, he's kind of, this is a nice thing for the fans. He's a stopgap, but obviously had a more realistic sense of who he was at that point, where he just was, kind of deluded into thinking that the good times were going to last forever, which obviously is unfortunate. So the other guys who are included in sort of this category, Elvin Hayes, who after winning a championship with the Bullets went back to the Rockets where he initially had played. Alonzo Mourning, of course, with the Heat, who would later win a championship in 2006 with Shaq and Dwayne Wade. Jason Kidd returning to the Mavs in the late 2000s. That was kind of a controversial trade at the time because they gave a pretty good young point guard in Devin Harris, but that worked out well. They won the championship in 2011. Moses Malone had a second stint with the Sixers in the 90s. Bob Dandridge, very end of his career, played again for the Bucks after he went to the Bullets. The Pistons, they loved the 2000s teams because they brought back Ben Wallace, Chauncey Billups, and Tayshaun Prince for second runs.
Oh, I forgot about the Tayshaun Prince one. Yeah.
And Billups and Prince would actually play for other teams again. If they didn't even retire as Pistons. Wallace did, but the other guys did. And Chauncey Billups also played twice with the Nuggets. And the second stint was supposed to kind of be like his I'm coming home, because he also played at the University of Colorado, so he was he didn't do much in his first stint with the Nuggets, but obviously became a star in Detroit. Came back during the Allen Iverson trade of all things, and it was supposed to be like I'm going to move this organization for my entire career. I'm going to retire here. I'm going to be part of the front office, and that didn't happen. He was part of the Carmelo trade for the Knicks. Kevin Garnett, of course, coming back to the Timberwolves. Of course, that not ending particularly well for, I guess, the relationships there. Artis Gilmore, he had a second stint with the Bulls at the very end of his career. Roger Brown and Freddie Lewis had second stints with the Pacers toward the end of their career. Billy Knight also was with the Pacers. And Paul Westphal with the Suns, he had a run at the very end, I think 83 or 84 at the very end of his career. So, and there are probably, again, there are probably other ones that we, forgot about. But so I think we're going to move on to the next category, which is players where there was a quick do-over, where there was remorse about them leaving and bringing them back fairly quickly. I think this is kind of where Lance mostly fits in. And I'm going to talk first about Antoine Walker, who was traded, had played for the Celtics 96 to 2003, then again would come back for a mini run in 2005. Just 9 days before the 04 season began, he was actually traded to Dallas with Tony Delk for Rafe LaFrentz, Chris Mills, Jerry Welsh, and a first-round pick that turned out to be Delonte West. Rafe LaFrentz was infamous for having a terrible contract at the time, which did not go well for the Celtics. This was right after Danny Ainge had come in and he was sort of leading his imprint on the team. And as a TV analyst, he basically did not hide the fact that he was not a big fan of Antoine Walker's game. And then after he was traded, his comment was that he had quite a grasp on the franchise. He's been the best player here for quite a while. He's been a vocal leader in the locker room. Now we're headed in a different direction, making it clear that, it wasn't there. But yeah, I mean, I think Antoine Walker is kind of a running joke now, but he was actually a pretty effective player during his time. The big thing was that his shooting percentage was very low, and he was not a good defender at all, and he was considered shooting too many three-pointers at the time. But in his career in Boston, he did shoot around 33%, which, not bad for his position, although the percentage varied very greatly from season to season. His true shooting percentage in his peak years was only like around 49%. So, but he did do good things. I mean, he was versatile. He had like a lot more assists per game than I remembered. So, I mean, he could do a range of things, but, he definitely had his faults, but he also had his positives, which I think are not well remembered.
No, I agree. Yeah, people, and it probably partially was, the area he was playing in. People kind of, because he was at that point a chucker, what I mean, like putting up 5 threes a game. It's like, oh my god, what are you doing? You're just chuck or whatever. But like, yeah, he wasn't playing bad basketball at any point. I mean, there was some issues with him. Of course, the defense left a lot to be desired. But the shots, he took some silly shots here and there, but he made a lot of really good shots too, and that was his game. Like, it was one of those things where the second you told him don't do this, don't be aggressive, you lost all that made Antoine Walker special and all that made him a very good player. And yeah, like you said, he's a running joke, but that the Celtics team, they had a solid little core there with a Pierce and with Antoine Walker, and Walker was just as much of a part of that as Paul Pierce was. Of course, history sees it differently because Antoine gets sent away and kind of scuffles after that, and Pierce then teams up with KG and Ray Allen and all those guys and becomes a world champion or whatever. But Antoine Walker was just as much of a piece as Paul Pierce in those early years as well. And yeah, he's kind of a joke now, and that's really not fair because he was very good for a time.
Yeah, I agree. So he came back after the year in Dallas. He went to the Hawks, the 2004-2005 Hawks that we're fond of. They were going nowhere, 13-win season, so he was traded back to the Celtics for Gary Payton, Tom Gugliotta, Michael Stewart, and a first-round pick that eventually became Rajon Rondo. The Celtics got it back later. I'm not going to bother explaining how that happened. And this was Doc Rivers'
Suns are cheap. That's how.
Yes. All right, fair enough. Right. This was Doc Rivers' first season as a Celtics coach. He obviously wanted to be on a winner, and Ainge had said that he said he had for a long time not wanted to bring him back, but then he said, I think he improves our team right now. It doesn't jeopardize our future. We've been in discussions with Atlanta for about a month. They were looking at taking some of my pieces for the future. Today, the price came right and the risk came low. So basically, it was like, well, we have nothing to lose. Why not? And the owner was a little bit more optimistic about it. Said he brings a much-needed presence under the boards and a proven winner back to Boston. We're making a playoff push and our focus on becoming a better, bigger team down the stretch. And His first game back in Boston was a win against the Lakers. He 16 points on 6 of 17 shooting, 13 rebounds, and 4 blocks, which was not usually part of his game. But he actually wore the number 88 at first and then switched with Al Jefferson, who was number 8, to go back to his old number. So from a Bill Simmons column of the time, basically says that he felt like, when Antoine Walker left, they were happy. It's like, all his bad habits were there. But then he felt like, with Pierce and the other guys, they just didn't have the same spark. They missed his competitive spirit and, said that he always cared. And that, so when he came back, they were kind of happy that he came back. And it actually led to a, pretty good, run for the Celtics. They won 11 of their first 12 games after he came back. They made the playoffs and they lost in the first round to the Pacers. It took them to 7, and they did build some fun memories with Paul Pierce again. So, overall it was a nice, short term, nice little story, nice little thing of creating memories. But the Celtics were probably smart to go in a different direction afterward. They ended up trading Antoine to the Heat in one of the biggest deals in NBA history, 5 teams, 13 players. And he ended up winning a championship for the Heat in 2006. Was actually an important player for that, but he really fell off right afterward. And unfortunately, he's best known for, at this point, losing $110 million in earnings for his career.
Yeah, it's not fun, but it worked out pretty well for Walker, I think, because getting away from Atlanta, I think was a positive thing for him, and going to Boston, and I remember even at the time it was a fun little thing to go on, and he's in a lot of ways kind of resurrected his career and got back the idea that Walker could be a decent piece of a good team, and I think that led to Miami then, of course, getting him, and people will again forget, like you said, he's kind of a laughingstock, but forget that he was a big part of that team and a big floor spacer for a team that sorely needed that Miami team, because you had Wade, who was of course very much a get to the basket type guy, and Shaq, who of course always is around the basket. So you having a guy like a Walker really did spread the floor, and it was finally a time when his skills could kind of get utilized the best. But like you said, he very quickly fell off a cliff, and I think he had that 1 year in Minnesota that's completely forgettable as well before it was all said and done for him. But it was a fun little season for Walker, and a player that probably doesn't get his due for a multitude of reasons, historically. But maybe we'll lead the charge of the Antoine Walker Respect Fund or something. So
we've seen some good video clips of Antoine Walker. I'm sure he'd have that, like, if he played in this era, he'd have been great. I'm not quite sure about that, but I mean, he was a fun player, and I enjoyed watching him.
It was really fun. He had the shimmy. I mean, come on, the shimmy. God, the shimmy. Yeah. Like, how could you not love the shimmy?
Yeah, he made a lot of those Hawks games bearable. So. So, some other key players who were kind of in the same category. Tyson Chandler for the Mavs. You could also put J.J. Barea in there. Both those guys kind of came back after that championship run. Chandler left again, of course. Heath Turkoglu with the Magic came back soon after he went away in free agency. Derek Fisher with the Lakers came back a few years later. He was there for their second round of championships in the 2000s. Sean Elliott with the Spurs spent 1 season with the Pistons, came back right away. Mark Jackson for the Pacers in the mid-90s, left briefly for Denver and came back. Kirk Heinrich actually done it for both the Bulls and the Hawks.
So we both feel the same pain, so I'm glad.
Yes. Al Harrington for the Pacers. The second stint was very brief. He ended up being part of that big trade to the Warriors. Was part of that, we believe, Warriors team. Antonio McDyess with the Nuggets, Anthony Davis with the Raptors, and A. Jones with the Heat.
And then we'll move on to another category here, reminders of a past era. And these are players who were important in the distant past, but didn't really come back and try to replicate their old success, but it just did not work out very well at all.
Yeah.
And that's first guy I'm going to come up with is Steve Francis here, of course, with the Houston Rockets. Famously, he was overshadowed in his own trade because he was sent to Orlando for Tracy McGrady. There was a few other players as well, Kevin Cato, Catino Mobley, Juwan Howard, Tyronn Lue, Reese Gaines. But the bulk of the trade was Francis leaving the Rockets, going to the Magic, McGrady coming from Orlando back to Houston. A lot of the Houston at that point had Yao Ming and was a pretty solid team under coach Jeff Van Gundy. So that was seen as a trade where Houston was really solidifying themselves, whereas Orlando was a bad team and Francis was going to a not great team. And there's some quotes quotes as well that Francis was kind of gun shy about doing it, but then sort of got convinced that, hey, I'm going to be the leader of this team that's rebuilding, and next year, if we get the number 1 pick, we'll get Dwight Howard, and like we can build some things here and see what we can do, and yeah, it didn't work out very well. But after 3 years of struggles in both Orlando and New York, we will not talk about the New York Knicks tenure because that's even more depressing. Francis returned to the Houston Rockets, and Francis was made available when the remaining 2 years and $34 million of his previous contract were bought out by Portland, who had just acquired Francis in a deal with the Knicks. The trade was the Knicks traded Francis and Channing Frye to the Portland Trailblazers for Dan Dickau, Fred Jones, and Zach Randolph. So it kickstarted the old Zach Randolph New York Knicks tenure. So good times in old Knicks land, but luckily they're a stable franchise now and everything's working out well for them. So
yep.
Luckily they've seen past that era, and now they're just a solid franchise that's always looking towards the future. But with money being no factor, Francis chose the Rockets over the Miami Heat, the Dallas Mavericks, and the Los Angeles Clippers. The Dallas Mavericks will literally sign anybody. Like every single guy
they will. Yes.
They've been like, hey, you want to come here? Like, no, I'm going to go here. Okay, fine, no problem. Like every single player, they've always tried to sign. Like, didn't they have like Sean Kemp come in for a tryout like 6 years ago, like way past like Sean Kemp's time? Like they will just Eddie Curry, I think, even tried out for that. Like they will just anybody.
I can't back off this. I think it was more than 6 years ago for Sean Kemp, but
my timeline might be a little off there, but
yeah, but I don't think he was playing on the 2011 team. I don't think there was any chance of him.
Like, we need another rim protector, Tyson.
Yes.
Do you mind if we bring Sean Kemp back?
What, 50-year-old Sean Kemp? Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong on my time. Maybe I'm not as old as they think. Maybe I'm starting to get old, Jason. That's the problem.
It's okay
because to me 6 years is still like 2005, and it's not. So damn it.
Yeah.
So of course, again, so their money wasn't a factor, so it chose the Rockets, the hometown. Expectations were, they were okay. The top option during his 5-year stint with the club. This is a quote from an article. He will be no more than the third option behind Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming. The team was in the midst of a great run at this point. They had won 52 games the year prior. So Francis was just the guy. We just kind of needed him off the bench. Didn't really need him to be the guy. Just a guy that could come out there and score a little bit. And it worked out for a little bit. He had 8 points in 23 minutes in his debut, or re-debut rather, with the Rockets, November 17, 2007 versus the Phoenix Suns. He was quoted as saying, "It's been great. They've been sticking behind me no matter what. Hopefully this is the start for me to continue to get playing time, trying to help this team win." So how did things turn out? Well, they turned out well for the Houston Rockets. They won 55 games that year, but Francis was barely a factor. He averaged 5.5 points and 3 assists in 10 games before undergoing season-ending surgery stemming from an earlier quadricep tendon injury. He used his contract option to come back to the Houston Rockets for the 2008-2009 NBA season, but he was not able to play at the beginning of the season due to the recovery of his injury. And then on December 24th, 2008, the Houston Rockets traded Steve Francis back to the team that had originally drafted him, the Memphis Grizzlies, except now the team was they were then the Vancouver Grizzlies, then they, of course, became the Memphis Grizzlies. This trade was for a 2011 conditional draft pick, and the move allowed the Rockets to drop under the luxury tax threshold. On January 27, 2009, Francis was waived by the Grizzlies without ever appearing in a game for them, and then no other team ever expressed interest in Steve Francis. So that was the end of the Steve Francis era. So it seemed like a pretty good. What sucks though is I really wanted to see him in that role because we talked about Iverson and he seemed a little unwilling to do the bench role, that's fine, I'll just be a guy on the team and sort of thing. But Francis seemed to embrace it a little bit with that return to the Rockets, but just his health wasn't there. And of course, he's had issues, in the post-NBA career as well. But I was always fascinated to see if he would have done well in like a Jamal Crawford role or a guy that just, has to come off the bench and don't have to really worry about a whole lot, but just go out there, play your 15 minutes and score as much as you can. I'd been interested to see that because I do love seeing guys like that. I mean, Vince Carter has really carved out an entire new era of his career being that sort of guy. So it would have been fun to see if Francis would have done that. But of course, injuries robbed us of that. So it didn't happen.
Yeah, I agree. And Francis was a really fun player for a time. He was really, kind of fierce and athletic. He nowhere even nearly as good as Russell Westbrook, but in terms of being a guy who just like could athletically wow you as a guard and was pretty good at getting the basket, like that's he was kind of the he was like 30% of Russell Westbrook in the early 2000s. That's the best we had at the time. So.
Yeah, not the same explosiveness, but no, I mean, if you watch highlights of him, he was explosive. I mean, he really was.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some stuff that you see, especially for his size too, because I think I forgot where he measured up, but I think he's even shorter than Russell Westbrook by a few inches, if I remember correctly. But there was a couple years there where he was a very dynamic player, but he just fell off so quick, and his body just fell apart too. So you lose a little bit of that where people don't really necessarily see him as one of those dynamic, explosive players, but he was. I mean, comparing him directly to Russ, I don't know about that, but he was, the poor man's Russell Westbrook at that time, I'd say.
I was trying to put as many caveats as I could on that while still making the comparison.
No, and I don't think you're wrong. If people go look at highlights, I think they'll be very surprised because a lot of people, especially if you kind of follow the NBA now, you probably remember more of the Nick Steve Francis, and that's you don't want to remember Nick Steve Francis. So,
no, you don't.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking of Nick Steve Francis, go to YouTube and look up Steve Francis, Houston Rockets, and then you can cleanse your body a little bit.
If you can handle looking at those uniforms, then,
the uniforms are hideous, yes, but
a
few of those Yao Ming years were pretty fun. I like that first year or so with Yao. So
good times. So a few other guys notable in this category. AC Green, who had a second stint with the Lakers, actually won a championship in 2000. Byron Scott, who his final season was Kobe's first year. Vlade Divac, whose final season was Kobe's first post-Shaq year. And Lakers let you do that. Spud Webb, who had a second run with the Hawks in the late 90s. Kevin Willis, who was part of the 04-05 Hawks.
Kevin Willis can play when he's 50. Why couldn't Sean Kemp?
That's fair point.
They both got themselves in peak physical form their entire careers, so I don't see why not.
Sure, definitely, yeah. Steven Jackson had a second stint with the Spurs. Chris Webber went back to the Warriors at the end of his career. It was not a good experience. And Dale Davis, who returned to the Pacers for a second stint as well. So, and we'll go through a few more ones of interest. These are more just these necessarily weren't that notable players on their teams, but this. Worth noting anyway, a lot of these came from a good Basketball Insiders piece on guys in 2 stints with one team. A couple guys have had 3 stints with one team. Leandro Barbosa with the Suns, and who's also on the Suns right now. Steve Blake with the Trailblazers. And 3 players have had 2 stints with 3 franchises. Matt Barnes with the Clippers, Kings, and Warriors. Manute Bol with the Bullets, Warriors, and 76ers. And Joe Smith with the Sixers, Timberwolves, and Cavs. And guys who have had 2 stints with 2 franchises, John Salmons with the Kings and Bucks, Tim Thomas with the Knicks and Bulls, and Theo Ratliff with the Pistons and 76ers. And then other guys with 2 stints with 1 franchise, Jared Dudley, who's with the Suns now, Tyreek Evans with the Kings now, Brad Miller with the Bulls, Mo Williams with the Jazz, Devin Harris with the Mavs, Shane Battier with the Grizzlies, Mike Miller with the Grizzlies, Derek Coleman with the 76ers, Horace Grant with the Magic. Completely forgot about his second stint there. Chris Gatling with the Heat, and Delonte West with the Celtics. And there you go.
That's quite a list. Those are good guys.
So, and again, I'm sure we've forgotten some.
Yes. Well, please let us know if we have. At Overback NBA, please do let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, on Facebook or Twitter, either way, at Overback NBA. You can also find us if you go to the Step Back at fansided.com and leave some story comments or just click on our links, click on the other good stuff that's going on there. And thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon.